What's going on, beautiful J4 family? Thank you guys for joining me on a Friday. I hope you've had a wonderful, wonderful work week, that you were productive, or more importantly, that you had a chance to take some vacation. That's what I've been doing for the last couple of weeks, really not, a bit intermittently off and on. I'm representing the Raiders today because one of my hustles, one of my sort of side projects that I truly enjoy is speaking with rookies in the NFL program before the season starts. And this week I was in Las Vegas, Nevada, chopping with the Raiders. And so it's been a while since I've posted here, but I figured since I'm back and kind of getting settled in before heading back full blast to work next week, I thought I would get on here and continue down the pathway of exploring this beautiful thing called biracial, mixed racial identity. I have a high interest in the subject matter, in part because I didn't know. I didn't know that the biracial meaning, the biracial word, the biracial identity had sort of had a different worldview or a different orientation to identity than I had as someone who's born in 1968. A very small percentage of young, beautiful human beings would classify as biracial. In fact, in 1970, it was about 1%. But fast forward to today, 2020, almost 33.8 million of the human family here in the United States of America identify as two or more races, and that population will only continue to grow. And so we did a session called White Mothers and Their Black Biracial Sons. It continues to be very popular on J4 Conversations. It's the most appealing session that we ever did. And it let me know that, hey, in these YouTube streets, there's some interest around the subject matter, which makes sense because many more interracial marriages today than in any other time period. And with the exception of Asian, all other ethnic groups are continuing to grow, and the trajectory of more interracial marriages occurring is going to be highly, highly likely, which then begs the question, ways of formulating identity of old, in my generation, again, born in 1968 in the biracial space, are vastly different than they are today. Different set of questions, different set of data sets, different set of experiences for biracial children. And so naturally, biracial folks, as the populace grows, are beginning to assert themselves in different kind of ways. And I certainly understand, even though intuitively it doesn't quite set with my worldview and orientation. So welcome, welcome. Thank you guys for coming in. Please let me know where you're from, what you represent, and what platform you're on. And then also equally important, should you like to join the conversation around today's subject matter, feel free to kind of click on the link and join in. I really, really am interested kind of going forward. In previous sessions, I talked about what would it take, and then I listed about 9 criteria it would take for the biracial question of a totally independent racial and cultural identity to sort of fundamentally exist. What I think those 9 things would ultimately be. And I think we're there. I think we're there. What's good, hybrid? Peace, golden brother. I appreciate that, hybrid. You know where I'm still at. I'm still a biracial kid. I identify that. I acknowledge that racially. But then culturally, I still consider myself black. But I'm exploring. If y'all are interested in a growing community of very strong, vibrant, no nonsense voices from the biracial mindset and experience, y'all kind of Google golden sphere, SPHERE, and you can hear what's on the beautiful young people's mind over there. So I appreciate the de facto heads up. So Howard, good to see you. So I'm really interested. I did some data set. Those were in earlier videos. We talked about a biracial culture. We talk about the biracial revolution will not be televised. It's on YouTube. I'm discovering that on one side, in terms of the monolithic black, you have this challenging to biracial young people about whether or not they are black, which is very interesting to me. It does not square with my worldview. And then you also have biracial folks who are standing up culturally and asserting themselves as having their own identity. And there's a lot of folks, there's a lot of scholarship out there in this space. So I think the biracial question is increasingly becoming louder, and there are ample voices to provide the depth and the content. So I want to kind of stay in the space. I've I've had some challenges to my ideology. Hybrid Ninja is one of those individuals. Um, we had another brother over here the other day that this articulating their experiences. Again, I'm 58. Some folks are in the 30 ranges, 20 ranges, and even younger. And it's important for me in my work that's largely around Black male development that I understand kind of what's going through the head, the mind, and the life of young people. So I want to talk to biracial sons, whether that's Black, white, biracial, or some other ethnic group, biracial. I want to better understand your experiences. I want to talk to daughters because the dynamic in any space, biracial, monolithic, whatever the case may be, it is a distinctive kind of reality, whether you're male and or female, right? Females have another set of nuance that they contend with. They also have a different biological clock in a sense of when they go through puberty, what is sort of their development and coming of age, particularly their standing in social circles and among their peer groups. And men, young men, also have their own uniqueness in the trajectory and growth from a biological kind of standpoint. You then add on top of that a biracialness, sort of a nuance of identity, right? Being of a cultural parent and a white parent, perhaps, or perhaps of two different cultural parents, which is another nuance of the biracial conversation, right? I want to learn about that. And then also, this channel is primarily a father to father kind of conversation, or i.e., a parent kind of channel. Love to talk to parents, love to talk with parents who are in interracial marriages, and what kind of things are you dealing with or contending with, what is working, what is going very, very well, and what are some angst points that you might have as you witness your sons and daughters kind of go through world trying to grapple and understand this thing called identity. So that's kind of where I want to go. So today I thought I would just, kind of look around the internet and see kind of what's going on. And I came across an article called 10 Most Common Problems Most Mixed Race People Can Relate to. This was presented by a blogger called Mixed Up Mama, Mixed Up Mama. I think she is um, from Libya and Britain, is her kind of biracial background. I don't know exhaustively about her, but the topic kind of appealed to me. So here's what I want to do. Here's what I want to do. And Hybrid, if you want to come up with me and maybe go through this process with me, just let me know. So what I want to do is answer some of the 10 questions that she presents from my vantage point. And again, my vantage point is I was born 1% biracial identifying people. Fast forward to today, that's 33.8 million, vastly different. I think it's around somewhere around 10% of the total population. I grew up in a military environment, which has some protective, safe measures tied into it in terms of behavior of families, because the behavior of the children and parents is tied to the employment of the person in the military. But I also traveled a lot. My dad kind of got an assignment into Italy when I was in the second grade, and so I moved to Italy and I lived in an Italian town. Had a very immersed experience from second grade to fifth grade, or 9 to 12 years old, and that shaped my worldview. We would catch the train to go visit my mother's family in France. My mother is a European white woman who actually is half Algerian and half white herself, or half French, rather, Algerian and French, and they grew up in France, and that's when my parents met. When my dad's first assignment in the Air Force was France. But when we lived in Italy, I'd often catch the train to go hang out with my French side of the family, and that allowed me to then discover yet another culture. Right here, I was a biracially kid of Black father, white European mother, living outside the United States where I was born, living in another part of Europe, Italy, living in an Italian town, navigating that, and then traveling on occasion to another country in Europe and to France. And so my worldview is largely shaped by my earlier childhood experiences, but it was one that you would think would naturally acknowledge all the complexity and beauty that is in my sort of cultural heritage DNA. But the times, man, the times coming up in the 70s and 80s, the question was for biracial kids, how are you finding memberships specifically in a Black monolithic? And I talk about that extensively in some of the other kinds of videos. And I think that's in large part, beautiful family, because there just wasn't enough of us to formulate a robust populace of individuals who could formulate questions unto ourselves among our own community, with each other, dialogue, gain a sense of community, camaraderie, collegiality, a sense of space and community that we could then, venture outward and navigate monolithic culture, white culture, and those kind of things. So we just kind of blended in, and maybe we should have challenged that a bit more, because in doing that, in many ways, we were lifting up one part of our biological heritage and diminishing another part of our biological heritage. And in the grand scheme of things, beautiful family, I don't think that's a healthy thing to do. And I imagine there's a lot of white angst that mothers, particularly white mothers, had, in that space. I recall my parents having to navigate um, work environments, right? My mother worked in Las Vegas, Nevada, and she'd work in the casino space, and this was the '70s, and race was a different thing there. And she was European presenting, kind of looked like Elizabeth Taylor, Cleopatra, right, and worked in the Caesar's Palace. But there was a direct conversation among my family that my dad would not go to the job. He would not go to the job, and if he did, he certainly wouldn't identify himself as my mother's husband, and I would not go to her jobs as well, just to avoid the question of, oh, you're married to a black man, as evidenced by the man himself, or a child who was presenting biracial, largely phonetically through my hair. And so we made decisions very early on as a family to navigate white spaces and to take issue where we need to take issue, but not to unnecessarily raise the question of biracialness or interracial marriage, because it was not favorable at that time. It could cause consequence or potential harm, at least in terms of continued work. So yeah, it was very interesting in my mind. It wasn't a utopia, right? It wasn't the worst thing, and it perhaps wasn't the best thing. And I think young voices today, assuming they've self-examined blackness, they've self-examined who they are in this process, to simply think, hey, it's time that we turn and begin to launch our own thing is a good thing. So that's what I want to explore today. The 10 most common problems most mixed race people can relate to, by blogger Mixed Up Mama. Before we go to number one, it was easier for your generation to gain access membership into blackness. That is today in 22. That's from my experience. That's Hybrid talking to y'all right there. Hybrid is talked about someone who's well traveled himself. He has initially been drawn to culture through the Black conscious space, immersed himself into that. Should he come up, you'll instantly know right away that he's a thinker. He's a critical thinker. But he's found this gatekeeping dynamic that I talk about when I talk about biracial kids who are seeking membership into a blackness. There's certain things they ought to consider, right? There's certain pathways where one can gain at least closer proximity or in-group status with blackness. But one of the first things is to realize that black folks often are the gatekeepers of that membership, which unto itself is a problem I certainly can understand. And Hybrid had problems with that, right? And so he's speaking that over times and over progress and over change, different questions for different sets of people. All right. Your blackness can be revoked based on how the winds blow in today's time, right? Again, lending itself to the credence of the question is one of my sessions called "Are Mixed People Still Black?" which kind of speaks to this question. So as a way of having a little fun here, so the first question that Mixed Mama talks about is, what problems do most mixed race people have in common? Okay. So, and again, when we talk about mixed race, it's not just black white, although that tends to be the forward facing coupling when you talk about biracial communities and people in the contemporary society. Although the most popular pairing, at least from the data set that I'm looking at, this blew my mind as well, was actually American Indian. That was the word, Native American, First Nations people, and white. That was the the number one pairing of biracial communities. But because of how America tells its racial story largely from a black-white perspective, although increasingly more voices are asserting themselves, rightfully so, for not only recognition at an individual level, but also recognition at a historical level. But a lot of times the conversation is talked around black-white, all right? But I believe Mixed Mama wrote this article representing all the mixed heritage that has, or to say it differently, those who check two or more races since the 2000 census. All right. So welcome. I'm seeing some few folks up here in the boxes. Feel free to announce yourself, where you're from. Very interested to know if you are biracial or a parent of a biracial person, because I really want to learn from you, pose a few questions to you, chop it up with you, and see what's on your heart, your spirit, and your mind. All right. Ivory, let me know. Okay. Questions about your racial background. Huh. So that's number one. What problems do most mixed race people have in common? Questions about your racial background. Was I asked this question? Yes, absolutely. Do you have a Facebook page or a group? Yeah, I have a Facebook page called J4 Conversations. Uh, if that's what you're talking about, then yes, J4 Conversations in Facebook. And then I have an IG, but that's more my personal page. But yeah, to your question, um, let's go to Facebook and type in J4 Conversations. Questions about your racial background. You know, I've always heard my biracial counterparts raise this as a problem. And I wonder, is it a problem if just an average person, you're at school, you're in the class, it's a diverse class, and you go through the awkwardness of being new to the school, and you meet people and you stand up and you say your name and where you're from, what you did in the summer, or maybe you're at work and you're getting to know some people, or maybe you've been there a while and an acquaintance kind of comes up to you and asks inevitably, where questions about your racial background, right? Right. They've articulated this as a problem. So I would agree that the author's not introducing anything kind of controversial or problematic. But to be honest with you, Hybrid, to be honest with you, beautiful family, I've never seen it as a problem. I've never considered it a problem. I've never seen it a form of displacement. I've never seen it as a form of anything other than an interest, right? In fact, I saw it as an acknowledgement of a uniqueness. I knew exactly what I was. I knew I didn't fit into any kind of obvious box, right? I can understand how we move and meet people, and one of the first things we see of them is sort of phenotype, what they present, and then the mind kicks in and says, okay, well, what is the gender? Maybe they'll think, what is the sexual orientation? Maybe they'll then think, what is the racial category, right? I think the human mind naturally does that when it makes assumptions about them before the person's even opened their mouth or done demonstrated any kind of behavior. If they begin to stereotype them and prejudice them before they even open their mouth, yes, then you get into sort of racial discriminatory kind of practices. But I think it's natural as human beings seek to understand context that they look at what they see and they try to do some kind of categorizations. And so when people ask me about my racial background, I saw it as, for one, not wanting to mislabel me, right? Or recognizing some incongruency from what they're seeing and what they've historically seen, and that here's something new, something a phenom, some sort of thing that does not quite fit into their what they've seen across the world in their neighborhoods, cities, whatever the case may be, and they're just genuinely curious, right? I also, as a biracial kid, saw it as a moment to share something, right? When you share or when you disclose, disclosure is the process to develop genuine connections to human beings. Disclosure. The first level of disclosure is kind of what's your name, where you're from, right? Most people deal with that. But kind of what's your background is kind of a low level disclosure, things you could probably find on the internet. Second levels of disclosure are where you're sharing story, you're sharing details about your life, some things people may not know. So first level is just kind of surface connectivity among human beings. Second level of disclosure is actually giving you some depth, some character, some personality, some stories, some chapters, right? And then, assuming there's some commonality, you resonate with that and you're more curious, and then you build on, right? And then the third level of disclosure is to share how you feel about someone. I'm proud of you, right? Hey, what you're doing, that could cause harm, right? Where you're actually going into, you have some connection to this individual. So you're sharing things with them that are not surface, not seen, they're contextualized. So the third level of disclosure is typically done among close friends in terms of sharing with each other. So consistent with the first level of disclosure is, hey, where you from? And to me, I saw it simply as a gesture of wanting to get to know individuals. And when it was just outward mixed kind of company, I never saw it as a problem. But if it would consistently come from a black space, because every time I went from, you know, one black environment, hey, where are you from, racing? What's the tone of it, right? Was it an accusatory tone? Was it a what you doing over here kind of tone, right? Then maybe I'd have some offense to it. Left one black community, entered into another black proximity of space, right? And then they too were sort of challenging me. Yeah, I could then see it as a problem. But the way it's presented here in the article, it's more so the random person that doesn't share your cultural background, even one half of it, or whatever the case may be. You just got an average white person, average whatever the case may be, asking you the question. That's presented as a problem, according to mixed up mama. I don't see it as a problem. I'd like to know your thoughts, those of y'all listening in. Is it a problem to you when someone questions you about your racial background? I don't see it as a problem. I see it as genuine interest. I see it as curiosity. And to me, that could be for a number of reasons. I don't think the majority of those reasons are nefarious or ill willed, but it might just be interest. Hey, look at this person. I want to know more about them, right? And who knows then what that parlays into. Okay. The dreaded question. This is number two. The dreaded question. Where are you from? Okay. So that's a distinction from about your racial background, right? Huh. That was actually an opportunity for me to kind of let them know, man, hey, my pops was a Creole cat from New Orleans, African American man, married to a French European woman, mid 60s, right? Give you some story, give you some nuance, give you something about me, right? A way of connecting. So the author here makes the distinction, the dreaded question, where are you from, right? So to suggest that you're not from the United States of America, maybe, right? Where are you from? So you're a biracial presenting person. The question of where are you from, which is geography, right? If you're in the United States, majority of people nationally are American or U.S. citizens, and you would kind of take that for granted, at just a highly generalizable level. And so for someone to ask you where you're from is to say, hey, you don't fit into the box of what I think an American would be. And maybe in that person's mind, they understand blackness, Latino, Asian, Native American, white, but some mesh of this representation personified in the appearance of a biracial kid takes them outside geographical location or legitimacy in the United States of America. I don't know. I don't know. I've had those literal words asked, where are you from? And to me, what's your racial background? Those mesh to me, those are kind of similar kinds of questions unto themselves. And so in my response, I would just simply do the same pathway. My father's from New Orleans, Creole cat, that puts it in Louisiana, which is in the United States. But then I do probably speak to their underlying question of what is this otherness, and that's the European French mother. But the curiosity, again, the basis of the curiosity, in my experiences, it has not been maliciously presented. It's not been presented through ill will or some kind of attempt to one up me or something like that. It has been presented out of a certain kind of curiosity at whatever level and measure. So let me pause there. Beautiful family, thank you guys for listening in. We are reviewing the 10 most problems that mixed kids face. First one was questions about your racial background, and then where you're from. The author talks about, is that a question, an exotification? Is that an objectification of the mixed race child? Maybe, maybe. But again, from a space of, what's underlying the question, to me, the question was preceded by not only a curiosity, but some kind of interest, right? Some kind of, hey, I want to get to know this person a little bit. And depending on your age set, you might use that to your advantage. Okay. All right. Thank you all for just joining in. Please head over there to YouTube. If not there already, give us a subscribe, a like, a comment. It helps us grow because that's my intent. There's a lot of biracial folks in the world. The percentages are growing, and parents have questions on, hey, how do I best support the development, identity growth of my biracial child? I know offline I used to get a lot of questions, particularly from white mothers, asking how their biracial sons, who they wanted to have some connection to a blackness. I'm assuming the black pops wasn't in the picture in any formidable kind of way. And so they would often ask for, what are some community engagement opportunities, organizations, readings that they could recommend for their sons in particular. So I know there's questions out there and the population is continuing to grow. All right, so let's get back to the list. Flitting. I think that should be flipping, but she uses the word flit, F-L-I-T, several times. So maybe that's a new word for me in these biracial spaces. Flitting between multiple different identities and races in a matter of minutes. All right. So in my day, that would be called code switching. Code switching. So where you're in your black space and you have a certain way of being in that space, certain kind of demeanor, certain kind of customs to it, certain kind of language set, certain kind of way you move, the way you greet, certain kind of language tools that you use, right? Just a way of sort of being present in a way that's compatible with some normalization of what it means to be in blackness, but then to find yourself in another environment where there's mixed company, white folks, work, different cultural community, that maybe you make adjustments and you then take on the customs, nuances, rhythm, vernacular, vocabulary of sort of the new place. I call that code switching. In this article, she's calling it flipping between multiple different identities and races in a matter of minutes. Again, the title was sort of problems that mixed kids deal with, right? I don't see this as a problem. I see this as a talent. I see this as a skill set. I see this as a sophistication to be able to walk into any room and to be able to hold your own and often bring more to the table because you've had complexity. You've had exposure through your two or more races to two or more cultures, right? And when you're biracial, oftentimes the question of who am I is a prevailing dominant question. So it creates heightened curiosity around culture. And so you study more, you explore, you research, you read, you watch different kind of films. And so just by nature of being a biracial kid puts you in a space of curiosity to learn about all the things that you are and beyond. And so when you walk into any environment, assuming you have a certain kind of confidence, a certain kind of skill set, you've had some practice, some trial and error, that's actually a talent, right? The capacity to code switch or to flit, F-L-I-T-T, actually brings you favor. Because assuming your work or your hobbies or your philanthropy or your entrepreneurialism, whatever the case may be, you're going to deal with the representation of the human family. And if you are a multiple representation of that and you can flip in and out and maintain yourself, maintain your space, maintain your proximity, and engage others across different kind of cultural views, I would call that a bilingualism, right? I would call that a biculturalism or a quadriculturalism, where you can navigate spaces with ease and you can do them literally within minutes, or you could possibly even have one conversation with a person of this community and then turn your head and have another conversation with a person from another community, and you can sophisticatedly manage and acknowledge both, right? And when you are in there, you can add to the nuance, right? You have the capacity to survey a room, an entire room, and through your life lived and experience, you can you can connect with them at a generalized level that everybody's a part of, but then you can nuance it to by communities. when I speak to large audiences, I have a norm, a base outline that I'm talking about, but I'll throw cultural inferences in there. I'll throw gender inferences in there where I know I'm only speaking to a small portion of it, but it acknowledges them beyond just general member in that audience. It gives them sort of a cultural connection to it. So I don't see it as a problem. I'd love to get y'all's thoughts. Let me know if y'all see it as a problem or if I'm just being a little bit too naive here. So again, just to recap, it's a problem for mixed kids to get asked about their racial background, where they're from, very close, and then also flitting, F-L-I-T-T-I-N, between multiple identities and race in a matter of minutes. Okay, all right. You're often reminded of what you're not, okay? You're often reminded of what you're not. More often than not, you'll be reminded about the fact that you're neither black nor white, Asian nor Caribbean, Indian nor European. So what does that exactly make you? Okay? All right. So you're often reminded of what you're not, right? So this is often a bantering tool among young people or whatever the case may be, where when they want to one up each other, they can then go, well, you ain't 100% black. Your mama's white, right? And so you're often reminded of what you're not. All right, let me play with this one a little bit. I agree with this one more so than the others. That, here you are just wanting to go see your cousins, want to go play some hoop, want to go catch a movie, whatever the case may be. But across the banter and ebb and flow of young people, all of a sudden this thing gets racialized and you find the monolithic criticizing you or pointing out some birth reality, which is in essence to kind of marginalize you or outgroup you from whatever's going on at that particular moment. And you're reminded of what you're not. Right. Now that's interesting. So my journey into this particular space was an articulation that racially I consider myself black, although I acknowledge I'm biracial. Culturally, I consider myself black. That's the spin of contention in today's conversation, to where young people are saying, hey, you got two parents of different backgrounds, you are biracial. Now, culturally, you can choose what you want, but from that racial distinction, you acknowledge both parents and not sort of assign yourself a singular monolithic identity. I understand that, 21st century, but for me in my world, I never felt as if I was not 100% black, and if that sounds crazy to you. Once I got out of the proverbial gray of blackness, which was the summer after my high school year, I went to college and I decided that I was going to have a black experience in college, and I did that. I did that from classes, I did that from a fraternity, I did that from organizations I joined, things that I studied, researched, friends that I chose, relationships that I was a part of, and I had a very immersed blackness. But I was able to do that because I was embraced by a blackness, and I was also during a time where there was high unity, and the measurement of blackness was not your biology, but your loyalty to blackness, and more importantly, how you lived your life on behalf of black uplift. Right? Those were the norms of my time, and so it was hard for someone to kind of make me even take it serious that they were trying to challenge my biracialness, right? And in fact, if someone tried to challenge my biracialness, they better be real heavy on their mouth game, because I was going to come at them. I was going to prove I knew more about blackness to them, because a part of my journey into blackness was overcompensating for light-skinnedness. And the way I did it, the stick I carried was history. And I was able to articulate a cultural clock with some depth and accuracy that was above average. And so if you weren't an average reader or weren't a history major or a black studies major, I could hold my own with you. And so I would see it as a chance to double down and to have a conversation with a monolithic black person about just how black are you, right? Is blackness just skin, or is blackness understanding history, where you come from, what's your opportunity in the immediate moment, and are you living a life that's relevant to improving it? Right? That became my definition of blackness. Do you understand where you're from, what your history is, cause and effect? Do you understand where there's places we still need to improve, and what are you doing to be relevant to it, right? How is your life lived on behalf of the work of the ancestors and the lived elders? That was my criteria. And so you're often reminded of what you're not. I'd have loved to have that question in my day. That wouldn't have been a problem. That'd have been a pleasure. Beautiful fam. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate you here. Love to see some activity in the boxes. Let me know what you think, right? Do these questions bother you? Am I underestimating their impact? Is it nuanced by whether or not you identify culturally as Black and are biracial, or if you're biracial and you then get questioned again and you already walk in recognizing some proportionality of one or the other, and then someone then further jabs at that? Is that a point of sensitivity and vulnerability? I don't know. Let me know your thoughts. All right, number 5, wondering where your children fit in. Accepting the fact that your child will have an even deeper struggle than you about finding out who they are and where they come from can be difficult. You may already find it a struggle to fit into certain groups. Well, I will say this. Any person that has a child, you obsess with that child, their well-being, the fact are they provided for, or you should, and also how they not only are being Maslow's hierarchy, right? Food, safety, shelter first, and then you go into a sense of belonging to become a part of things. That's where you go out from nuclear family into some kind of social construct. In the social construct, you have opportunities to prove yourself, to get praise, applause, challenge, understand social normings. And from that, you get a sense of belonging. And then after belonging, you start to move into enlightenment to get a sense of things around you. And then, finally, you get into a level of luxury or self-actualization. But yeah, parents, we are highly concerned about how our kids fit in groups. And so I can understand mom and dad of biracial children. You will, constantly think about how to orient them to the world. The way my wife and I did it, I'm biracial, my wife is Black, my kids are very light-skinned, they're biracial presenting. It was no doubt in our pathway that we were going to raise them with a Black leaning. And so that's what we did. And so our concern was about exposing them to Blackness, right? Both in books they read, friendships they had, families that we all exposed each other to and socialized with, choosing schools that had at least high diversity, and then also constantly messaging when and how appropriate about the beauty of Blackness, and then also things that are available in the popular culture to sort of underscore that. And so I didn't vacillate in that regard because it was just sort of a singular pathway. But today's generation is, thinking differently. So today's generation, I could see mom and dads, especially because they're leading, rightfully so, as a biracial family, as a biracial unit or an interracial marriage unit. And so they are trying to raise kids who are of honoring both heritage. That was different in my era. Typically, the high encouragement was to biracial kids to lean Black, to sort of to keep white moms sort of in the background, and to just teach your children how to immerse into a Blackness in a way that was healthy, confidence, and fed their sense of self-esteem. Today's generation is more open, more forward, more accepting. And so as they raise their children, they raise them from the duality of biracialness, duality of two heritage, but then with that comes sort of new nuance, right? That's new era, new territory for me. We'd love to hear how folks are dealing with that. All right. Siblings may identify differently, right? yeah. So you got one child that's asserting Blackness. You got another child that's asserting biracialness. You got another child that's asserting nothing in the biracial space. Their identity might be gender or sexual orientation, right? So I have 6 kids, and one is an academic, a PhD that does all her work in kind of initially social justice spaces, which have Black leanings, but is way more fluid now to include all kind of intersectional identities. So she's very much immersed in the academe space. My oldest son is rooted in a Blackness, but also is very critical of capitalist models. He's also very critical of patriarchy. We argue quite a bit in a good father-son way around that space. And so he's very much kind of liberal in his leanings, and but he certainly comes from a black orientation. My next oldest son, he identifies culturally as black, but he's more of an engineering type. He's a robotics guy. He's a tech. He likes things, and those are things that he kind of focuses on: computers, coding, those kind of things. So, the blackness is in his world, but it's not a passion point for him because his focus is other places. Then my third son, he's black, black, black. He's kind of followed in my pathway: black fraternity, black relationships, black conversations. That's heavy on his mind. And then my fourth son, he's also pathing the same way, not as intensely as his older brother. His thing is more about organization, community work, education, but all of his cultural suggestions would suggest this a rootedness in blackness. And then my baby girl, she's social justice oriented as well, but she's predominantly had a lot of white friends through school and whatnot, but she's pretty quick and witty around understanding racial nuance, who also has sort of a leanings into blackness. So there's variation in my own kind of family, but yeah, siblings may have identified differently. Could that be a problem? Possibly, possibly. All right, beautiful family, I'm getting ready to wrap up around number 6 here. If you have any thoughts or questions or want to get in briefly, this would be the time to do it. Number 7, you'll feel pressure to pick one identity and stick with it. uh, that was my journey. That was my journey, right? I felt the pressure to pick one identity and I stuck with it. And for me, it has done quite well. It has taken out all the ambiguity, all the uncertainty, all the grayness, all the self doubt, right? For me to be able to land in blackness, despite how light skinned I am or white presenting I am, was a joy. It was a relief. It was liberating to sort of get out of the proverbial gray, land in a community, understand its code, understand its nuance, its customs, kind of what its agenda was, and to sign up and start marching, cat. And so I was able to do that. But I also was able to do it in part because my parents got divorced, lived in a black space with my pop, went to a predominantly white institution, but then immersed myself in the blackness within the context of it. And it was just refreshing. It was refreshing. Today, I realize a biracial kid may have two parents at home, and they come home and they got to acknowledge the love source of both the parents. I also realized that it was 1% in my time. Now it's 33.8 million, right? So the questions are different. But for me, it wasn't a problem. In fact, I welcomed it, I created it, and I taught it to my children. And so my children are now the age set of some of the beautiful young people that I've been chopping with here in some previous videos. And I don't know what their cultural journey was or their middle school, high school, college, or post high school experience was. But I had no doubt that I was going to move my kids towards a blackness. So they've never come to me and expressed the frustration as biracial presenting kids who are more black than I am, percentage wise, of this having to pick one side. The question was never presented to them as such, right? Do I pick my dad's white French side, or do I pick my black mama and half my black daddy side? So we didn't have that struggle. So wasn't a problem for me, but I understand it could be for today's beautiful young folk. All right. People actually believe mixed people are the solution to all forms of racism. That sentence don't even make sense. I'm not going to address that. You'll never find true community, and if you do, it's like they're in your family. Meeting someone with the exact same racial makeup as you is exciting, mostly because you feel so much like an outsider in another community. To meet someone who is mixed like you and with the same background is instantly family. That the problem is you'll never find true community, and if you do, it's likely they're in your family. So true community mixed up mama is talking about people that share the same biracial configuration as you, is what I think I'm reading. So for me, if I found another kid with a black father to dig down another level of a Creole experience, married to a European French woman, or at least a European mother, that would be my community. Huh. I don't want to put words in mixed up mama's mouth, but that seems to be very narrow, right? To me, as I'm listening to the conversations on the Golden Sphere and some other kinds of YouTube conversations by biracial folks, they consider themselves, extended family members. They consider themselves having a connection simply because they are two or more races, and they recognize that those configurations aren't exact or cookie cutter. They also recognize that life lived and experience are nuanced and different, but their anchoring common identity, i.e., the familiar source, is the fact that they are two or more races, and in this conversation are grappling with a relationship to whatever the cultural monolithic is, and they're asserting themselves as more of an autonomous kind of entity. It's that broader swath, that broader association that is kind of their kinship, their connection, their glue. So you'll never find true community. I don't know if I agree with that. I certainly have immediate affinity, cultural connection with biracial folks, and that biracial connection typically is a black parent and a non-black parent. And that, if there's that configuration, I certainly have a sense of affinity with them from the biracial side, but also that then transcends into a collective blackness, because my worldview is communalism within blackness, that we are a common culture. We're not cookie cutters. We certainly have contradiction. We have stratification. We have class nuance. We have colorism nuance. But the membership part, be safe. The membership part was always of a collective black cultural diasporic mental association, again, rooted in an understanding of our arrival to the United States, our current standing in it, more work to be done, using your life to improve it. That's kind of the mantra of my era, and that connects me to the totality of American blackness. And then in some other aspects, more education on my part required, the sort of Pan-African diaspora, but also through understanding the nuance of culture, I'm also on a path towards understanding my membership in humanity. And in other sessions, I talk about one can't sort of truly set in humanity without first going through their own cultural experience, because it's within the confines of relative homogeneity, the sameness, that you learn your lessons about humanity, about emotion, about fear, death, joy, laughter, experiences, angst, all that. You learn that in common homogeneity sort of circles, and you learn lessons that you can then transfer out of yourself and impose them upon other people, so you too can acknowledge their pain, joy, suffering, achievements, and so on. And then that's when you truly begin to understand the beauty of humanity, because you went through a cultural understanding and are a piece of it in its broad totality. All right. So the last one, you'll never find a true community. Okay, cultural dynamics can be tricky at home. Your parents are so different, and though they love each other, you don't really need to travel far to experience cultural conflict. Yeah, this is not what she's saying, but yeah, sometimes not so much in your immediate home, although I don't necessarily know that a white or black parent particularly is very culturally grounded just because they find love in interracial marriages, right? So you could have uh, hell, you could have a white mother who holds on to some racialized luggage, who loves a black man who has whatever level of understanding of black reality or white reality, and they love each other and they're raising kids, and all of a sudden they're making decisions, and all of a sudden this background, this dissonance, this oh wait a minute, this worldview starts popping up, right? So just because you see two interracial marriages don't mean that they all DE and I experts. That'll manifest itself. And so there can be internal house conflicts, but oftentimes I see that in the extended, where you go visit other people's families, right? So you a biracial kid, you go with your mama to her white family, if that's the particular makeup, and then you at the family reunion, and 98% of them are just down, willing to embrace you, but then you got groggy uncle over there sipping on a Miller Lite that just wants to get crazy with it. And then same thing on the black side, right? You go over there, you get your embrace, you get your hugs, You get your plate, and then you got, militant radical nephew over there, and then he just kind of, wreaks havoc on this space. So yeah, cultural dynamics certainly can be tricky. I absolutely agree with that. So I'll close with this, y'all. Interesting article. Appreciate Mixed Up Mama writing that. I don't agree with a certain part of it. If you want to read it in more depth, feel free to go to the description. I put a link to it. I would say there's probably two issues that are problems related to the biracial community, related to the black community. Two major problems that really require further discussion, analysis, and reflection kind of going forward. And the first problem in the biracial conversation is the fact that membership in blackness has to go through a gatekeeping dynamic by the predominant monolithic. That's a problem. The fact that a biracial kid who desires black membership has to go through some kind of cultural hazing process to gain membership, that is a problem. Because anytime you have a paradigm that suggests you have to prove yourself, you're going to have some people who can do it, and you're going to have some people who cannot. And the person that cannot gain membership into something that they want to be a part of, and they have connection and actually a pathway because they are of that particular cultural community, if they cannot get into it, what are they going to do? They're going to do what all human beings do. You rejecting me, I reject you. You reject me, I'm rejecting you. Right? And they don't know where they're going to go to, but they're just going to go to the proverbial grave of biracialness. And they're going to seek common communities, maybe join with other individuals who have had some kind of nuance in terms of identities, in middle school and high school, and among cousins and extended family members at work. And, they were embraced by this black community, but not this one, right? At some point, they're like that, forget that, right? That is a problem that most mixed kids have to contend with. How do they gain membership, right? And maybe it was because I was 18, I was determined, and I was embraced, right? I didn't feel resistance. Again, at the time, biracial, we had a lot of privilege, man. Girls liked us. We were in a college kind of environment, and the awareness of history and the range of hue and blackness that was sort of commonly understood, and the prevailing of the question of the time was black unity and black work. And so we didn't get this major pushback. So I did not have that angst. But the fact that today's generation is having to essentially declare and fight for membership and acquiesce and cajole and whatever the case may be, now that is a problem. That is a major, major problem. That is a major problem. And it ought to be more like, if you are born biracial, black, white, that you have membership in blackness and you have membership in your biracialness. But until you prove otherwise, until you start maybe confessing anti-black kind of sentiments, right? Or you kind of begin to just simply critique and no love towards the community, that maybe even a black person would be ostracized, a monolithic black person would be ostracized from that community, but at least they kind of wake up in it, right? A black kid, a monolithic kid, two black parents, they wake up in blackness and they kind of live it and they experience it and they pick up on the cues and the group kind of dynamics, right? Ought to be the same for a biracial kid with a black cultural component to their heritage. They ought to have membership. And then if they kind of go along and choose to do some other kind of things, then so be it, just as black monolithic young people do. But this gatekeeping dynamic, that is a big, big problem. Because if you have a test, some will pass, some will fail. The ones who pass, hey, everything's rosy. The ones who fail, they're going to feel some kind of way about it. And they're not going to just keep trying and trying and trying and going through that possible self-angst and misunderstanding. Now they're going to go do something different. That's a problem mixed race kids deal with. And then the last one, and I'll probably do a little bit more on that, is this black-owned biracial violence. That's a problem. Black-owned biracial violence is a problem. Biracial on black is a problem. Where you have, for my world, this homogenous group, this black group, when there's going to be tension. But when you got young people coming at each other in these YouTube streets, these social media streets, and they're belittling each other, they're attacking each other, again, around phenotypes, light skins attacking black folk, darker skinned folks attacking light skinned folks, this black on biracial violence, biracial on black violence. One can argue which way is predominant, who started it, tick for tack, but all that is doing is pulling the community further apart. That is a problem that face, mixed race kids face. This internal civil war that we have going on in the community, right? Where dark skinned folks who understandably are having some angst because of perceived privilege and opportunities and societal positioning among lighter skinned folks going about their day, waking up, moving through life, but then also then feeling this stereotype, this attack, this animosity, this borderline hatred coming from darker skinned folks. That's a problem. That's a much bigger problem than where you're from, what's your racial background. So, beautiful family, as y'all are sort of in these cultural defining streets, whether you're monolithically black, biracial, curious about identity formation and development, the two most prevailing questions that I think we need to think about, particularly black monolithic people, people of two black parents. If we are sort of historically the embracers of biracial kids, just what is the standard? Is that if that is our role, if that is our inherited century, decade kind of role, what are we doing with it, right? Are we caring for that? Are we nurturing that? Are we even consciously aware that we are sort of the proximity gatekeepers, right? And are we not laying a pathway of love, of embrace for our biracial family members? Are we not doing that, right? And then in both ways, right? Are we attacking each other? Are we sort of feeding off of each other? And in that process, we're imploding and quite possibly destroying contemporary modern blackness. And those who are fed up with it, they might be applauding that. I'm talking about the biracial kid who's beginning to reject blackness. They might be applauding that because they felt some sort of vulnerability and trauma when trying to explore it and become a part of it. And so there needs to be some critique. This youthful social media, YouTube attack upon each other. I understand personal experience. I understand personal frustration. I understand you wake up, you have an experience, maybe it's monolithically black, biracial. I understand that. Maybe that person took your man, that person took your woman, right? Maybe that person got an opportunity you thought was yours. I understand that at an individual level, and there's all kinds of examples and truth in that. But when we take our personal experience and we then impose and indict an entire part of our community, we are creating an internal racial civil war among ourselves. And young people today are starting to respond to that. That is a problem. And so as you all are kind of going forward, I hope y'all will have conversations that are beyond just stereotyping each other, that are beyond just attacking and labeling each other and trying to assert light skin over black skin or black skin over light skin, right? I hope you can step back and maybe gain an historical, cultural perspective here to think about what are sort of external factors that are enjoying and applauding and clapping for this conversation, right? And begin to think of it beyond your individual self and ask the question, is this healthy for our collective cultural self? I think the biracial community is going to continue to move down a pathway for a more sync or synchronized kind of identity. That's inevitable because the numbers are just going to warrant that. I hope that does not mean an extraction out of the black monolith, but that question of biracial membership cannot be taken for granted anymore. And the question of sort of what direction it goes is going to require thinking, thoughtful folks in the biracial community, but it's also going to take thinking, thoughtful, intentionality, recognizing its proximity of power in this particular identity dynamic from those who are of two black parents. And so, beautiful family, that's kind of where we're at. I'm enjoying this conversation, just kind of musing and thinking about it out loud. Love to have any of your last thoughts or comments, should you have them in the comment. I don't know if you enjoyed it, if it was thought provoking, redundant, whatever the case may be. Would love to see you share your thoughts and comments as I get ready to close out. We are exactly at the hour point. Again, I'm wanting to explore parent conversations. That's the essence of the channel. Two fathers, two sons, chopping it up about life. But now he's more narrowly tied it into this dynamic of interracial marriages, producing biracial sons and daughters. My ultimate goal is that we raise beautiful young people who grow up to be healthy, grounded, independent individuals. Their capacity to be healthy, grounded, independent individuals who manage their own life is directly tied to this identity journey that they are in as soon as they leave their mama and daddy's house to start kindergarten, when they go to interface with the broader society. And society tells them things about themselves, things that are good, things that are negative messages, things that are indifferent, what their place is. And they begin to formulate senses of who they are. A part of that is pushing back. A part of that is joining. A part of that is thinking it through, critical analysis. But that's what it takes for a young person to become a healthy, grounded individual. It is more pronounced for the biracial kid. It is more pronounced for the biracial kid because identity is not assumed. Identity at the current moment has to be sort of gained, right? Or has to be taught at a family level. And that requires a certain kind of effort and sophistication on the biracial parent to help navigate that for their child. All children have development nuance. All children have social journeys they have to go through. All of them will struggle with acceptance and do people like me. All children would do that. There's an added nuance for the biracial kid. There's an added nuance that beautiful families have to sort of be in their corner and help them prepare for that. If you have those kinds of questions, if you have those kinds of interests, love for y'all to come up here on the channel, talk to me. I'm gonna ask you a couple of questions to get a sense of how you identify. I'd love to know what generation you're from, so that'll help me, get a sense of how you may have experienced diverse, interactive kind of communities. And then I'm gonna ask you what your questions are. I don't confess or profess expertise. I profess life lived. I profess life lived. I'm a 54-year-old cat, been married 27 years, have 6 children, all who present biracially. I myself am a biracial person by race and heritage, but culturally identify black. And I absolutely know there are a whole bunch of single mothers out there who are struggling, single white mothers who are struggling on how to raise their, I'll say biracial. Previous hybrid, I would say raise your black sons. But regardless of my cultural interpretation of nuances, we need conversations to raise healthy, grounded children. And from my vantage point, a particular emphasis on biracial sons or black sons. Hybrids representing 1989 in the house. Hybrid, appreciate you, brother. Do you have any questions or anything? All right, we are going to get ready to wrap. Good numbers, good energy. Definitely don't want to be up here running my mouth all by myself. So if y'all give a subscribe, that way you'll know when the next session's coming in. And I want to do less talking, more listening, more learning, perhaps even challenge both ways as we go down the path. But biracial is immersing itself, understandably. I hope that the black community as a collective is robust and nuanced enough where we can remain some sense of harmony and all of us in our own way answer the question of how do we live our life to improve the cultural community from which we come. On that note, J4 Conversations, truly appreciate you. Please help us grow, subscribe, share, talk to folks. Peace, brother. I'll join you next time. Hybrid, on that note, thank you so much. Y'all take care of yourself.